So I think that's what people confuse. They hear theistic evolution, they think you're denying something essential to the faith. The sun and the moon are going to be appointed to mark the days and the seasons. They're going to be used for marking things on the calendar.
Yeah. Genesis 2 then is the actual account of Adam and God kind of stepping in and engaging Adam in a
Ruslan.
Something else that gets you in trouble with fundamentalists is your views on creation.
Mm-hmm.
And you hold the position of theistic evolution.
Yeah.
So could you unpack that a little bit? And why would you say that where someone falls on theistic evolution or creation, literal six-day account, old earth, gap theory, full-on theistic evolution? One, so just help me understand why that's not essential and why sometimes conflating it as an essential is not helpful.
Yeah.
And then two, kind of what specifically your views are. And you have debates on this. I don't want to go super duper in deep because you have some really good debates on this.
Yeah. So for one thing, I think people, when they hear theistic evolution, they think we're denying essential core doctrines. I'm not. So I affirm there was an historical Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
I affirm there was an actual historical garden in a place called Eden.
Mm-hmm.
There was an actual tree. There was an actual fall.
Mm-hmm.
All that's compatible with theistic evolution.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not contradicting anything. I believe God created everything.
Mm-hmm.
He's the creator of all, according as John 1:1-3 says.
Mm-hmm.
And I affirm there was a literal fall. So what heresy am I holding to? None.
Mm-hmm.
I affirm all of that right there. So why would I deny evolution if I can hold to all essential Christian doctrines?
Interesting.
So I think that's what people confuse. They hear theistic evolution, they think you're denying something essential to the faith, and I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
So right then and there's no problem there.
Yeah. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of the other people, because basically the view of theistic evolution is that Genesis 1 is the account of all creation over evolution. It's not literal. It's more, I guess, allegorical, metaphorical.
Yeah, well, let's talk about my view on this. So again, I affirm all essential Christian doctrines here. So I don't say the Bible teaches an evolutionary account of history.
Mm-hmm. You're saying it's compatible.
I say it's compatible.
Gotcha.
You know, there are two different categories. It's like saying, does the Bible teach calculus?
Yeah.
You know, it's not the same thing. So,
Yeah.
so I try to interpret Genesis 1 in its ancient Near Eastern context.
Mm-hmm.
Now, look at what Genesis is doing. People have often brought this up. What's happening on day 4? How do you have night and day, morning and evening before the sun and the moon are created on day 4?
Yep.
So that's a problem.
Yep.
So some will try to
Say there's another light source.
which is not in the Bible. So here's an example of a young earth creationist adding to the Bible.
Aha.
And another light source. That's not in there.
Yeah.
So day 1, light is created.
Yep.
Day 4, the luminaries are created.
Yep.
Day 2, the sea and the sky are created. Day 5, the animals that inhabit them are created.
Yeah.
Day 3, the land and the vegetation. Day 6, animals on the land.
Yeah.
Notice a pattern.
Yeah.
You have almost a framework here. Day 1 corresponds to day 4.
Uh-huh.
Day 2 corresponds to day 5. Day 3 corresponds to day 6.
Interesting. Okay.
This is not chronological order. This is a framework order.
Aha.
They're doing this on purpose.
Okay.
And it shows intimacy with God. The day 3 and 6, you get more closer to where God is going to make his presence dwell, which is be on the land with the humans. So this is sort of what's going on. Now, compare Genesis 1 to Jeremiah 4.
Mm-hmm.
If you read Jeremiah 4, he's talking about how the northern kingdom was basically destroyed by Assyria. And he's saying, Judah, this is going to happen to you if you don't shape up.
Mm-hmm.
But how does he describe it? He says, it is formless and void. There is no man to work the field.
Mm-hmm.
There is no birds of the air. There is no vegetation.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds awfully familiar.
Mm.
It sounds very much like Genesis 1. And scholars will note, Jeremiah was aware of Genesis 1 when he wrote this.
Mm-hmm.
So, but notice what he's doing. He's using the language of Genesis 1 to just say a kingdom went from a productive state to an unproductive state.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why couldn't Genesis 1 just be doing the exact opposite in reverse?
Mm.
So it's just saying God took a chaotic world
Mm-hmm.
and he made it a productive world.
Interesting.
We see this on day 4. The sun and the moon are going to be appointed to mark the days and the seasons. They're going to be used for marking things on the calendar.
Yeah.
We're getting order handed to us.
Yeah.
Tohu and bohu, the words used in Genesis 1 for formless and void. They don't really mean that. If you look at scholars like David Samura or John Walton, they'll note it more likely refers to being unproductive.
Yeah.
So the earth was, I know Robert Alter translated as welter and waste. Mm-hmm. Things were not just working the way they were supposed to. So God comes in and he says, all right, well, here, the land is going to function as to bring about vegetation. The seas are going to function, or the water will function as seas. The light will function as day, then darkness will function as night.
Yeah.
The luminaries will function to give you calendar dates. This is how things are going to work in my new setup here.
Yeah.
This is what they're doing in Genesis 1. This is not a creation story, actually. In the ancient Near Eastern context, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Compared to things like the Enuma Elish, they are more focused on functionality, how things worked in human civilizations. So that's what they're focused on in this account.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, that's totally compatible with an historical past of evolutionary theory, because that's not what they're trying to describe. We have just sort of thrusted our modern understanding onto the ancient text and not read it in its cultural context. So if you go on my YouTube channel, Inspiring Philosophy, and you check out my Genesis 1 to 11 series, I put them all in a playlist. I go through and I explain this in detail, how this is more about functionality, about how this is God setting up the cosmos to be his cosmic temple, not him creating things materially.
Got you. So Genesis 2 then is the actual account of Adam and God kind of stepping in and engaging Adam in a literal garden.
Yeah, so Genesis 2:4 uses a phrase called "these are the generations of." That's Toledoth, and we see that show up in Genesis quite often. These are the generations of Terah. These are the generations of Ishmael. So we go through all of these, and there's like, these are the generations of. These are the generations of. These always introduce what comes after that person. They're like chapter markers. The next thing that happened is this. What we see in Genesis 2:4, that means it's a chapter marker. It's basically saying this is the next thing that's going to happen. It's not going back and filling in details on everything that happened on day 6. And so scholars like Benjamin Kilker argue what actually is happening is day 8 of creation.
Interesting.
And so that means everything that happened in Genesis 1 already has happened.
Hey, you want to see something crazy? 67% of the people who watch this channel are not subscribed. Do me a quick favor, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you stay up to date on all the videos here on the Blessed God Studios channel.
So when God called mankind, male and female, to be his image of God, that happened before Adam was on the scene. So Michael Heiser will note, this is basically God saying humans, wherever they are, or however many they are now the image of God. All right, anyway, next part 2. Now I'm going to hone in on the specific area called Eden, and everything's just going to happen there. I'm going to put a man and a woman in this garden. It's going to function as the first temple. They're going to be my first priest and priestess. And they're just going to function as, this is going to function as the temple. The tabernacle is very much based off Eden in a lot of ways. There's a lot of parallels between the tabernacle and the temple and Eden. So this is day 8 of creation account. So they're honing in on this specific area where God sets up his cosmic temple.
Yeah. And so there are people on the earth who die before Adam and Eve.
Yeah, and I think that's inherent in the text. There's a scholar named Joshua John Van E who wrote his dissertation, Death in the Garden. Now, we see evidence of death in Genesis 1. God tells humanity to subdue the earth. Now, that word in Hebrew is very harsh. It's very harsh. It refers to conquest, enslavement. Why would God, here's a question for the young earth creationists. If God made everything perfect, there was no death or sin or anything before Adam's sin, why is God telling Adam to subdue the earth? It doesn't need subdued. It's already perfect. This implies it's chaotic. And this is what we see in Genesis 1. The earth was formless and void. It was chaotic. It was welter and waste. God starts to subdue it. But now he calls humanity to subdue it further for him. All right, I'm going to work through my image bearers to continue to subdue the earth because it's still chaotic. Let's take Eden to the rest of the earth because it's not perfect out there, guys. I need you to go out and make it perfect. And of course, we fell. Jesus came to restore that, and that's what we're going to. That's now what the church's job is to do, is to make the world perfect now. So that's what we're seeing in Genesis 1. The other word is you have dominion over all the animals. That word is also very harsh. It refers again to harshly ruling over something. So Joshua John Van E says animals were given to humans for however they wanted. And we see this in Genesis 9. People say this is when humans were first allowed to eat meat. Wrong. This is actually a restatement of the covenant that was given in Genesis 1. Early commentators like Philo of Alexandria even noted this. Genesis 9 is just a repeat of everything that was given in Genesis 1. So animals are given for food because they were already given for food in Genesis 1. So read up on Joshua John Van E, how he goes through the Hebrew of Genesis 9 and Genesis 1 and notes this is just a restatement of everything that happened Genesis 1. And you can see my video on Genesis 9 where I point that out.
Interesting. What do you say when people say the idea that there was death before the garden, that doesn't sound like what Paul is writing in terms of death entering through Adam? And, Adam is the guy that blows it, and then all of humanity. Oh, and then I was going to ask, would the people who were on Earth outside of Adam, did those people die off, or are those people still kind of like image bearers of God?
Well, all humanity is the image of God. Let's be clear about that. But Paul is using the same context we have, which is Genesis 3. And all Paul says is, death spread to all men. Well, how did death spread to all men? Well, we know. We can read in Genesis 3. God never curses Adam and Eve. He never changes their bodies from immortal to mortal. He curses the ground. Okay? And then he says, behold, man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. We're going to cut him off from the tree of life. So the only way God allows humans to die is he says, no more tree of life. So that implies human was already mortal, and the only way we were immortal
was the tree of life.
With the tree of life.
Interesting.
And this is, again, this is implicit in the text. When we see that God says, the day if you eat of it, you shall surely die. The Hebrew more likely means, as scholars like John Walton or Robert Alter will note, it more likely means you'll be doomed to die. So if you eat from this, you'll be doomed to die. And how does God doom them to die? Just cuts them off from the tree of life. So they were already mortal. So they were
interesting.
They were already mortal. And how does death spread to all men? Well, they lose access to the tree of life through Adam. So that is how death spread to all humans. It's because we lost access to the tree of life, and now we have to die like the rest of nature.
So was the tree of life kind of like a magical source of life for them? And if they were in the garden with the tree of life, they got to live.
Yeah, you could basically argue that. Yeah,
interesting.
So yeah,
I've never heard this before.
Yeah, it's all you can check out my Genesis 1 to 11 series. I did a video on each chapter. I did some videos. I did 2, and I just put it all on a playlist on my channel for people to go through, easy access to find it all. Just go to my playlist Genesis 1 to 11, and I go up to the Tower of Babel and everything.
So all of humanity doesn't come from Adam and Eve. All of our civilization doesn't come from Adam and Eve. It comes from, there's other folks that we come
I would
from.
say there were definitely other people outside of the garden that Adam represented before God, and all fell in him. So Adam was the priest that failed, and all fell with him. Jesus is the priest who succeeded, and we all succeed through him now. So how are we saved through Jesus? Well, because he's our priest. He represents us before the Father. He's the mediator, as Paul says. Likewise, Paul was the other mediator, and he failed, and we all failed with him, kind of thing. So it's that same kind of setup here. So if you accept that Jesus saves us through his atoning sacrifice, you also have to accept that Adam's failure also meant that we failed. If you want to accept the free gift of salvation, you have to accept that we all failed in Adam as well. And that's how death spread to all men. Our priestly representative before God failed, and therefore we all fell with him. And so luckily, of course, God heals the situation through his own blood.
Do you think Adam and Eve's descendants had babies with some of the other folks that weren't necessarily their own descendants?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, this is a weird thing. We know from
those
genetics.
Genealogies are very
Yeah, well, we know from genetics that you can't have incest. It's gonna result in all sorts of birth problems. Look at the Egyptian pharaohs, for example, and all the problems they have on their mummies. I mean, they'd have incest, and then their children's children couldn't breed because they were just so deformed. So it's very likely that Cain married someone outside of the garden. When he gets cursed by God, he says, everyone's going to come after and kill me. Well, who? Your parents?
Yeah, I always wondered about that verse. Yeah,
yeah, it's implied.
Yeah,
it's very much implied that there were other people outside of the garden.
Interesting. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to our exclusive Patreon-only segment. I'm going to ask you a few more questions. The number one reason you think people deconvert or deconstruct. I want to ask you the strongest argument for theism and God, if it's the one you used with Destiny or not, which had the simulation in it. It was such a dope argument. And what is the strongest, most linear argument for the resurrection? So,
hey, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see the full extended version of this podcast, be sure to sign up for our Patreon community for only $5 a month. It'll really help us continue contextualizing the gospel using YouTube, media, and podcasting. And in exchange, you will get full unedited versions of the podcast, of our daily after party streams, a discount for our merch store, and exclusive access to our private Discord server. It's only $5 a month. The link for Patreon is in the description of this video, as well as the pinned comment below. Again, hit the link in the description, sign up now, and I'll see you over there, all right? Peace.